This might sound familiar if you've recently started watercolor. You're excited about it, you've seen some really pretty things, you've had some success, but you're also having some struggles. Don't worry, you're not alone. In this video, I want to talk about some of the most common mistakes that I see beginners make. I'm going to want to use the term mistakes super loosely because the very first thing I want you to keep in mind is that the biggest mistake you can make is expecting perfection. Things are going to happen. You're not going to paint things quite how you want them to. Your paper is going to buckle. It happens. You can't completely prevent that. The tape might rip your paper. You might accidentally drop color in areas you don't want. The tape might bleed under. Things are just going to happen while you're painting, and you need to keep in mind that it's okay because you're learning how to work the supplies, and sometimes it takes a little bit for your knowledge, your skill, your hand-eye coordination, and the supplies to all play nicely together. So the first step is really to be more forgiving to yourself so that you can give yourself the room to grow. Pep talk aside, the way this video is going to work is I want to go through 4 common mistakes that I see during the painting process that will help you save your future painting. After we go over all of that, I want to then talk about 2 things you can do to save a painting. Maybe a painting just didn't turn out how you wanted it to, it's a little messier, or something has gone wrong with it. There are 2 main things you can do that might kind of bring a little life back into a painting that you think is too far gone. If you feel like trying any of the experiments in this video, you're going to need some watercolor paints, you're going to need a paintbrush, some water, some paper, and I'm intentionally using this 90-pound student grade paper. This isn't necessarily my favorite recommendation for a beginner paper. I'd actually recommend using something like Canson XL because it's a little heavier, so it's not going to warp quite as much. But I'm actually currently out of that, and I found this, and I wanted to demonstrate some of these things on paper that might be more realistic to what you're actually using instead of me showing you everything on cotton paper and you're like, that's great, but I'm not using super expensive fancy paper. All right, let's dive into the 4 most common mistakes that I see beginners most commonly make during the painting process. The first is you are not using enough water. When you're mixing up puddles of color, you want to make sure you're mixing up a bunch of color. You want to be able to basically fully submerge your brush so that the paint is almost dripping out of it. If there's a lot less paint, you cannot fully load your brush to get enough to actually get it to glide over the page. And what happens when you paint with too little water in your brush is you're going to get more streaking, and you're also going to have to kind of push harder, and pushing harder also encourages more streaking in your painting. So you're actually setting yourself up to get double streaking on the page because you don't have enough water, and also you're going to be pushing hard and creating the streaks because it's going to be kind of sucking up the water as you go. So you can see in my 2 little examples, the one that I didn't use enough, it's kind of streaky, it's a little more uneven, and the one that I have more, it's not perfect. Again, this is on that student grade paper, but it's a lot smoother and there's also more saturation, and it was a little more forgiving of a process to do when I worked really wet. So make sure you have a lot of water on hand for your color mixing and your brush washing. The second mistake I want to talk about is leaving puddles of water. So I talked about using extra water. So you're trying it and you have these big puddles of water and you think, well, she said to use more water. And I did. If you leave a puddle of water on your paper, it's actually going to create this thing called a backrun. Essentially, it's where the puddled area stays wet and the other area dries around it, and then it creates this weird border, kind of interesting texture. And that can be used to create really interesting effects, but a lot of times you want to avoid it. So the way that you stop that from happening is just making sure you don't leave the puddles of water. As you get better, you're going to learn more about how much water to put on, and you'll have less puddles to begin with, but that's not always the case. So what you want to do is when you're finished painting an area, you're going to check for the puddles of water, then you can take your brush, just dry it on a paper towel or a cloth. And then that's actually going to make this so that it can suck up the extra water. So you want to create a dryish brush and then you just touch it to that little puddle of water. And it's going to start to suck that up. Sometimes it does require you to dry your brush a couple times, but you're going to be able to grab that as you go and you're going to be able to remove that puddle. You don't want to touch all the way down to the paper, you just want to touch the tip of the brush to that puddle, and that will help prevent actually making marks on the paper. You're just going to be removing that puddle and then just letting it go. See in this example, the one that I left those puddles on, they have those back runs. They're a really kind of fun, interesting texture, but It was not what I was going for. In my second one that I removed the water from, it's a lot smoother. It's not perfect because, again, this is on that student grade paper and cellulose paper, which is student grade paper. So it's not made of cotton, it's made of trees, basically, or plant material. And it has some less forgiving characteristics, like being more prone to backruns. As a matter of fact, let me show you really quick. If you do have cotton paper and you're working on like a really important project where you want no backruns to happen, but you're not quite there with your water brush control scenario, using a cotton paper, like this one that I'm showing here, I can actually paint and leave big puddles of water there. And then when it dries, look, it's nice and smooth. Even though I did not suck up those puddles, I actually left the puddles on there to dry, but we don't get any backruns because cotton paper has just more predictable drying times, and that means that it's more forgiving, and it's actually kind of hard to create things like backruns and even sometimes blooms on cotton paper. So it's inherently more forgiving for those circumstances, but it is a lot pricier. A smaller pad of arches or something like this runs at least $20, whereas you can get a big pad of something like Canson XL for usually around $12, and you get more sheets and larger sheets. And in the learning process, for most people, it's not going to be an economical choice to get to know your paints and your brushes and things like that on a paper that is that expensive. The third mistake that I want to talk about has to do with maybe you're painting and you've just been really dissatisfied with how bright your colors are. You see somebody paint something and you try to recreate it and it just is kind of dull and a little bit lifeless and your colors just are not as bright or vibrant. It probably does not mean that your watercolors are bad quality. Even if you have a student grade set, you're probably just not activating them correctly to get the most color out of them. Now for beginners, the most common thing I see them doing, and it's not a wrong thing to do, it's just not quite the optimized thing, is they will take their brush, they will wet it, and then they will go on to dry watercolor, swirl their brush around, and then try to paint with it. Notice I swirled around on that orange color, and I do get some orange color. However, it's not very saturated and it's pretty light. So let's actually put some water on it. And we're gonna wait about 10-15 seconds here. And then I'm gonna take that same wet brush and I'm going to tap my brush onto that orange. And look at that, we automatically get more color. I'm gonna wait another 10 or 15 seconds and let's do it again because I usually recommend letting your paints activate for about 30 seconds to a minute before you get started. And after another 15 seconds, look at that, we get even more color. And just in case you're like, well, it's just that color that needs to be activated, I'm going to do this again with another one. Again, if it's dry, you're not getting anything. If you do a damp brush and then you go onto this pink, we can get a little pink. It's a nice light pink. Let's activate it. Let's wait for a bit. And look at that. We can get so much more color. So pre-wetting your colors is crucial to getting more color from your watercolors. You can either do this just with a brush and you can just drop some color on there. I like to use a spray bottle just because I think it's faster and I can activate more colors at once. Number 4 on our mistakes that you can kind of fix during the painting process actually has to do with the size of project that you're going to tackle. I often see beginners grab a pad like this. This is a 9x12 pad. This is a pretty common size of watercolor pad, and they try to paint the entire page. Even if you try to paint about half this page, that's a pretty big painting because with watercolor, we have to really learn how to kind of maneuver the water across the page so that the water and the page is getting evenly wet, and we have to control those drying times. And trying to do that over a larger area is tricky to say the least when you're just getting started. You can even watch here. I'm going to paint the same thing once in a little kind of almost 3x4 type size, and then once in something that's like 3 times the size of that. My first layer actually went pretty well. I'm not trying to be too careful while I'm painting these because this video is more about the mistakes beginners make and not having perfect technique. So I'm not being super careful during this. I'm layering on top of this on dry layers, and I'm adding in these mountain ranges. And notice that as I work through this painting, there are mistakes that happen in both of them. However, they seem to compound more and more on the larger one and they're also just way more visible. I'm getting more backruns and more streaking happening on the bigger one because it's just a larger area to manage of where's wet and where's not wet and what's starting to dry and what is not starting to dry, as well as my brush runs out of color more easily, and I have to use more paint, which means that I'm running out of paint faster. Not only that, but painting small is kind of a nice ego boost. Little things are really cute to do, and when you're learning, having these built-in successful paintings that are just cute for the sake of being cute is really going to be key to your confidence for wanting to try again and try something new. And I find that the little mistakes on the small ones are more forgivable because they're just so inherently cute on their own, whereas a larger painting, they just kind of compound and they just look more like mistakes instead of just being kind of cute and unique. So maybe the next time you're painting something and feeling kind of frustrated by it, try painting it a little bit smaller to see if it helps. As a really quick side note, the notebooks that I use are watercolor journals. These are something I have made and I sell. And I have them made small because I think it's more fun to paint little things and they're more forgiving to do. Now, if you followed all that advice and you still don't like your final result, the first thing is just be nicer to yourself. It's okay. Sometimes it takes stepping away, coming back to realize that something is good. That happens to me all the time. I'll paint something I think is absolutely terrible. I come back in the morning with fresh eyes and wow, I really actually kind of like it, and it turns into something. I could either take the idea or the thing itself is actually just way better than I remembered. So sometimes fresh eyes or a snack are needed. But there are a couple practical things you can do after a painting is done that will just kind of help things. The first is to let it dry, step away, come back, and then take a look at the painting. In this top one, I've kind of replicated a painting that maybe you didn't like the unevenness of. Maybe there were places that you didn't fully cover and you wish they were covered. And the colors might have been a little bit duller because watercolor does lighten as it dries. So maybe it didn't have the vibrancy that you wanted. Here's how we're going to tackle that. We're going to make sure our paper is completely dry, and then we can just add another layer on top of it. When you are painting on top of another layer with watercolor, you do want to use a light touch with your brush, and that'll make sure that you're not disturbing the color that's underneath it. But we can actually layer some more colors on here, so see how much more vibrancy I'm able to get by adding on in at least a few different areas. And I was able to kind of save this painting and take it from kind of lifeless and dull to at least a lot brighter and more colorful. There's a lot more hope going into this one. It's amazing how much painting more color on top of a completely dry layer can really just bring it all to life. If things are running amok, your colors are starting to bleed together you don't want to, and it's just not going your way, I want you to, instead of constantly trying to fix it and add more color, because you're actually just going to be creating more of a mess, potentially, just set your brush down, walk away, let it chill out, and then you can come back in another layer and try to fix the things while you're not panicking about maybe two colors coming together and making a really muddy color. Now, my second favorite thing to do to try to salvage a painting is to add some pen details. If your painting is completely dry and you're not going to be painting any more on top of it, you can use any sort of a pen or a mark making tool that you want to. My three favorites are to use a black pen, a white gel pen, or even a metallic pen to create some outlines or kind of some details on a painting, and it just really brings it to life. In that second painting on the page, I just added in some different pen details, and in my eyes, it took it from something that was kind of, it's fine, to, oh, I actually really like this, and you can allude to things, and you can add details and shadows or highlights. Sometimes a bit of pen can really bring something to life. And this can go for pretty much anything. Like this here, I painted some blobs and some messy flower shapes. And look how adding a bit of pen detail to this actually makes these look less like starfish and blobs and more like actual flowers. Is it perfect? No. But did it help? Absolutely. This video is by no means an exhaustive list of every mistake you could make in watercolor. What I really want you to keep in mind is that mistakes are going to happen. Be forgiving to yourself. You cannot learn a new skill or something like that without actually making the mistakes, so don't be afraid to make them. They're gonna happen and it's gonna be okay. When you learn a new skill, you might be bad at it at first. It's okay. I wasn't great at watercolor when I first started with it. As a matter of fact, I started watercolor, painted a few things with it, and then did not paint with it for another year because I was terrible at it. I finally revisited it and accepted the fact that I wasn't going to be great at it at first, and now I absolutely love it, and I feel like I inherently understand it, but I had to go through the process of being bad at it to get better at it. I would love to know in the comments what you personally struggle with in learning watercolor, because I'm curious, and also maybe I can help answer the question, or maybe I can make a video about it, or maybe it's something that I can kind of just mention in passing in one of my videos, because maybe there's a simple fix to it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if it was helpful to you, consider giving me a thumbs up. I hope that you have an absolutely wonderful day, or at the very least, some fun painting.